Hello crafty friends, it's Nikki with Stillwater's Wreath Designs, and today we're going to make a spring bee wreath. Everything that you see in this video is actually available as a full and completed wreath kit in my Etsy shop. I'll leave that link in the description below in case you'd like to recreate this for your front door. All right friends, so we're going to be using a 15-inch work wreath frame. If you're not familiar with work wreath frames, when they come to you, they're completed and ready to go just like this. So they're 15 inches in diameter, and all of these ties are already attached to your work wreath frame, so it's ready to go. We're going to use a couple of different colors of 10-inch deco mesh. We're going to use this bright lemony yellow, and then a black and white check. We've got 4 different wired ribbons that we'll be using, all to go with our bee theme. And of course, we've got this super cute Be Blessed sign. And we may or may not add some florals in. We'll wait and see how this looks. Some of the tools that you're going to need, friends, are going to be either a self-healing mat and a rotary cutter, or a good pair of scissors is fine too. And you're also going to need your wire snips. If you are purchasing this as a kit, friends, all of your materials, your deco mesh and your ribbon will be pre-cut and ready to load, so you'll be able to fast forward through those parts. All right, the first thing we need to do is get our deco mesh ready. So go ahead and take your wreath frame and set that off to the side. Let me just point out real quickly, friends, your wreath frame has 18 ties in total. So we need 18 pieces of deco mesh. And since we're using 2 colors, that means we'll be cutting 9 pieces of the black and white and 9 pieces of the yellow. And if you're making this on your own, friends, we're going to cut this at 20 inches in length. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 9 20-inch pieces of the black and white and 9 20-inch pieces of the yellow, and then I'll meet you back here. I've got my deco mesh all cut and ready to load, so I've got 9 20-inch cut pieces of the black and white and 9 20-inch cut pieces of the yellow. And now it's time to add our deco mesh into our work wreath frame. So if you're not familiar with deco mesh, friends, let me just show you what you need to do with each piece to load it into your tie. These are called ties. So you're just going to grab a piece of deco mesh, and what you're going to do is take your deco mesh. As you can see, it likes to curl in on itself, and you want that to be curl side down. And we're just going to make a cruffle. First, I'm going to roll under the edge 2 times. That basically just tucks away that cut edge to prevent the fray. And then, using your fingers on both hands, you're just going to scrunch and gather your entire piece of deco mesh until you get to the last few inches. You're going to curl them under, pinch them together, and that creates what we call a cruffle. And the cruffle helps prevent the fray on your deco mesh. I typically start on the bottom rung. You can start on either the top or the bottom. And what you're going to do at this point, friends, is add 1 cruffle to every single tie, pressing that cruffle all the way down to the base, giving it 2 tight twists, and then moving on to the next one. Because we're using 2 different colors of deco mesh, I'm going to alternate back and forth between the yellow and the black and white check. So again, I'm going to lay my deco mesh flat, fold that edge under a couple of times to hide that cut edge, scrunch and gather, scrunch and gather, scrunch and gather until you're nearly to the end. Curl under that last bit of mesh until you've got a cruffle. Go ahead and add that to your next set of ties, pressing it all the way down to the center of that tie at the base and giving it a couple of tight twists. And now we're going to move back to the yellow. We'll do one more together and then we'll speed through loading our mesh into our wreath base. So lay your deco mesh down, fold under your edges a couple of times, scrunch and gather, scrunch and gather. Make sure that last little bit's folded under so that you've got a nice cruffle. And we'll go ahead and add that into the next set of ties. Give it a couple of tight twists to secure it in. And we've got our first 3 pieces loaded into our wreath base. So at this point, friends, we're going to add in all of our deco mesh, making sure that you alternate between the 2 colors on both top and bottom layers, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, friends, at this point, there's no top or bottom to your wreath base. And so our next step is to add our sign into the wreath base. First, I want you to take your ties on that upper level and just gently point them outwards so that they don't get trapped behind our sign. There we go. Now, you're just going to take your sign. If you've purchased a wreath kit from me, friends, or you intend to, your sign is going to come pre-drilled with a hole on each side. If you're using your own materials, just go ahead and drill a small hole on each side, or you could flip your sign over and either hot glue, super glue, or staple a chenille stem on each side if you'd like to attach it that way. So we're just going to find our first set of ties, and you're going to take one of those 2 ties and just poke it right through that hole to get that in the middle, 3/4 of the way down. You don't want to press it so deeply into your wreath that it sinks. And in order to keep your sign right in the middle, you're going to want to make sure that you've got 3 sets of ties, 1, 2, 3, and then that 4th set will be where you add it, attach it. So now your sign is right in the middle, and you've got 3 sets of ties above it, and you've got 3 sets of ties below it. You're just going to let that sit freely. Don't twist those just yet. And the next thing we need to do, friends, is get our ribbon ready to load into our wreath. So I'm going to set this off to the side and grab my ribbon. If you've ordered a kit from me, this will come to you pre-cut and ready to load. If you're working with your own materials, go ahead and grab 2 different types of 2.5-inch wired ribbon and 2 different types of 1.5-inch ribbon so that we can cut our tails for our wreath. So remember when we were talking earlier, friends, I shared with you that there are 18 sets of ties on this wreath base. 2 of those sets of ties we're going to reserve for a bow. So that leaves us 16. And so for each of your ribbon types, all 4 of them, you're going to cut 8 10-inch pieces. And so when I'm cutting my ribbon, friends, I either use my ribbon board, or if you don't have a ribbon board, measure out your first piece to 10 inches. Just kind of mark that with your finger, and then just fold your ribbon over on itself 8 times because we need 8 pieces. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Once you've got your 8 pieces, go ahead and cut that off and set your ribbon to the side. And then you're going to find the center of your ribbon stack. Take your scissors and just slide that right up at the top and cut that in half. Flip that over and do the exact same thing. And so now we've got our 8 pieces of 10-inch ribbon. Now this specific ribbon, you know, I'm not sure what ribbon you'll be using, friends, but if you're using one directional ribbon, meaning it's intended to go one way, maybe you don't want your bees upside down, although with this it might be kind of cute. But either way, make sure that when you're cutting your ends that your pattern is all going in the same direction, so your cuts are uniform. I'm going to cut my ends at an angle. Make sure you don't overload your scissors, friends. If you try to cut more material than what your scissors want you to, it's going to give you a jagged, rough cut. I can actually comfortably cut 3 pieces with my scissors, so that's how many I do, but make sure you know your scissors. And to cut at an angle, our line will look just like this. So we're going to come down on one side about 3/4 of an inch and just cut at a diagonal up to the opposite corner. Flip your stack over, make sure your ends all match up, and do the exact same thing, making sure that your angle cuts are both going the same direction. So let's go ahead and cut the next 3. And marry those ends back up and cut again. And now we'll do our last 2. We'll continue this pattern through all 4 ribbon types, friends, making sure that you're cutting 8 pieces of each ribbon type at 10 inches in length, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, now we've got our ribbon all cut and ready to go, so it's time to add this into our wreath. So determine which you're going to pair with which, and what I mean by that is we are going to add 2 ribbon tails to each tie on our wreath base. You can pair them up any way you'd like, friends. It's your wreath. Certainly make it as you would, you know, you want to have it hanging on your door. And so it's totally up to you. I'm going to pair the black 1.5 inch with the yellow themed bumblebee. And then I'll be pairing the yellow and white striped with the black and white check bumblebee, just to have a good contrast. But again, it's totally up to you. And we're going to start with the upper layer of our wreath base. And so the first thing we need to do is add 2 tails to the ties that have actually attached our sign. And I'm going to choose this coordinating set here, and what you're going to do is just lay one ribbon on top of the other just by eyeballing it. Find your center. If you struggle with that, you can just fold it in half, unfold it, and then that line will show you the center. And you're going to pinch and pleat, pinch and pleat, pinch and pleat until you have what looks like a men's bow tie. Form that into a V. I just pull that down over my thumb and add that into your ties. And so when you add that, you're just going to push it all the way down, give your ties 2 or 3 really tight twists, and then with your wire snips, let's see where I put my wire snips. You're going to trim off that remaining bit of tie because we don't need that anymore, and just throw that away. I always just grab those ties, friends, and kind of curl them down a little bit. They can be somewhat pokey, and then fluff out your tails. And by fluff, I just pull that in a little bit better of a V shape, make sure they're kind of curling down. And I'm going to put the exact same stack on the other side. So the 1.5 inch on top of the 2.5 inch. Find your center, pinch and pleat until you've got your little men's bow tie. Fold that down over your thumb to help create that V. Add it into your ties, putting it down towards the center there. And 2 or 3 super tight twists. And then trim off that excess bit of tie with wire snips. Toss those away. Curl that down a little bit so it's not so pokey. And then fluff out your tails. Perfect, perfect. So the next step, friends, let me tell you here, I want you to be mindful of where we add in the other ribbon ties on to the top layer, because in your upper left, the very next set of ties above where we tied the sign and below where we tied the sign on, I don't want you to add anything into either of these sets of ties because that's where we're going to add a bow. So skipping these two, you're going to do the same thing, adding ribbon stacks into your ties. So I don't like the same thing to be next to one another. I like to alternate. So I'm going to come over here. Since we use the bright yellow B and the black 1.5 inch, we're going to use the opposite for the neighboring. Pinch and pleat. Add that into your ties. Give it 2 or 3 tight twists. Trim off that excess bit of tie. Toss those away. Curl that down under. And then fluff your tails out. Then next to that, I'll go back to that original yellow B with the black and white 1.5 inch, pinch and pleat in the center, fold it into a V, 2 or 3 super tight twists, trim those excess ties off, curl those bits down under, and fluff out your bow. Excuse me, your tails. Perfect. Now, remember, we're going to leave this set of ties alone. That's where we're going to add a bow in just a short bit. So we'll come back down to the bottom. We're going to add a bow here and a bow here. So we're going to skip this and move to the next set of ties. Pinch and pleat in the middle. Add that down all the way to the center. 2 or 3 super tight twists. Trim off your excess ties and curl those things down under. Fluff out your tails here. All right, one more set for the top. Adding that 1.5 inch right on top of the 2.5 inch, eyeballing to find that center, pinch and pleat, add that set of tails right down to the center of that tie, give it 2 or 3 super tight twists, trim off your extra, fold those pokey things down out of sight, and fluff out your ribbon tails. This is so cute. and springy. All right, friends, we've got all of our ties, excuse me, all of our tails added to the top with the exception of our bows. And so we're going to do the exact same thing on the lower level, friends. I just alternate back and forth between the two ribbon stack types. And remember, you're just going to add 2 ribbon tails to each tie on that lower level all the way around. And then I'll meet you back here and we'll add the bows. Now that you've got all of your ribbon tails added in, it's looking fantastic, but we're still not done yet. First, I want you to flip over your wreath, and you've got all this beautiful deco mesh underneath your sign, and nobody can see it. So, without being forceful, just gently push your deco mesh back underneath your sign so that it can be seen by you or your customer. There we go. Flip that back over, and you can see that made it much fuller on the front now that everything isn't squished below. All right, friends, so the next step is to add our bows. So I'm going to have you put away or push off to the side here your wreath and pull your ribbons back out, and we'll make our bows. So we're making 2 bows for our wreath, and we're going to make 1 by hand and 1 using the bow dabra. That way you can choose what method works best for you. Also, if you don't have a bow dabra and you'd like to add one to your wreath making collection, I'll drop that link in the description below so that you can grab one from Amazon. You're also going to need 2 black pipe cleaners and a good pair of scissors. And we will start by making a hand bow. To make a hand bow, friends, you are going to use the 2.5-inch ribbon first and the 1.5-inch ribbon second. So to make it by hand, I'm just going to pull myself out a good bit of ribbon. Determine how long you would like your tails to be. And I always make them a little bit on the longer side because, you know, you can trim it off, but you can't add any on. And then you're going to pinch that ribbon, twist, because you always want the pretty side out, and make your loops the size that you would like to make them. I'm going to guess these to be, yep, they're about 5 inches. Twist again, because see, we want that pretty side out. Make another loop of the same size. And to determine if it's the right size, friends, you can just stick your hand in there and make sure that they hit at the same point. And then cut your ribbon off because we're done with that first layer. Now keep a hold of that in your hand, and we're going to move on to the next ribbon type. Hopefully I have enough on this spool. I don't think I do. We better start with a new one. And I'm going to make my tails about 2 inches shorter than the previous tails because we want that to peek through. So lay that on top of your hand. Pinch and twist. Make your loop. Basically the same size or a tad smaller as your previous. Twist. Pinch and twist. Make sure those loops are about the same size. That one needs to be a tad longer. And eyeball your tail and cut that off. Move on to your next ribbon type. We're basically making a bow with all 4 of the ribbons that we used. Right, add your tail. Give it a pinch and twist. Make your loop just a little bit smaller than your previous. Make another loop. Make sure they're the same size. Hopefully the camera's capturing this well, friends. Pull your tail down and cut that off. And now we've got one more ribbon type. Friends, if you bought a wreath kit from me, or if you're going to, the bow is going to come to you already assembled. It's not going to be fluffed out, but your ribbon stack will be made. It will be tied off, and all you've got to do is fluff it out. So one more time, add your tail, give that a pinch, make your loop, same size as your yellows, twist, one more loop, and tail. And now you're going to take your pipe cleaner and just run that around your entire ribbon stack. Make sure you don't let go, or you'll be hollering at yourself. Flip that over. Make sure everything's going in the right direction. Give that a super duper 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 tight twist. And then I just spin my entire bow stack 5 or 6 times, so it's really super tight with that pipe cleaner. And it looks a bit of a hot mess, but you're going to fluff it out. And because we're adding it into this wreath, friends, we're not going to fluff it out until we get it in there. So it looks like a hot mess. It's kind of sloppy, but that's okay. That's what they look like at first. Just make sure everything got secured in here. What I'm basically doing now, friends, is just for this particular bow, we want all of the tails to go down. So I'm just pulling them down. And then we can pull our wreath back in. We're going to use this for the upper bow. Go ahead and grab your snips or your scissors and trim off that excess bit of pipe cleaner. And now you're going to make sure that your tails are all laying in the right direction. Kind of split that in the center and open up those ties. Press your wreath down in. You want to press it low enough that you get a secure fit, but not so low that your bow is sunk. So I've probably got, 1.5 inches of ties left at the top. Just give that 2 or 3 tight twists. Trim those dudes off. Just like before, fold that tie under. And now you've got all these ribbons hanging out up here. So you can fluff this out any way that you'd like. I'm just going to show you how I do it, and then you can, tweak your recipe based on how you would like to do it. So I'm just going to fluff. I'm pulling the big ones apart in an X, and then the little ones apart in an X. And because these are wired, they'll hold their shape. Perfect. And then I'm going to cut things at an angle, just like we did our ribbon stack. Basically, I like different layers, and I don't like my sign to be covered. So that's basically how I determine where I'm going to make my cuts. And of course, at different layers. If you're not sure about how you want your tails to hang, friends, I always like to encourage folks to just cut off a little bit at a time. You can always trim more off later, but you sure can't put it back on. If you watched any of my videos, you've heard me say that lots and lots and lots of times. Perfect. We'll give that a final fluff. Once we're done, we may need to trim a little bit more off because it's wanting to cover our sign, which we sure don't want. But the rough fluff, as I like to call it, is looking awesome. Let's see if you can see that, friends. Definitely going to need to trim some more off, but we'll do that in a short bit. All right, let's go ahead and make our second bow. And you're about to see why I prefer the bow dabra, especially if I'm making lots and lots of bows, because your hand gets tired. So this is the bow dabra, friends. If you've never seen one before, it's just a plastic piece that comes with, I call it a pushing stick. I'm not sure what it's actually called. And you can actually purchase bow dabra bow securing wire if you would like, but I typically just use my own floral wire or even a chenille stem, just as we're going to do today. And so you run your wire or chenille stem or whatever you're using right down the center, and then you just tuck it underneath to keep it out of the way and keep it from getting coming loose. Then turn your bow dabra around. And we're going to put our ribbons in the same order that we did on our first bow. And so the first ribbon that we used was the yellow bumblebee. I don't like my ribbon to hang too far below where my deco mesh is, so I'm going to eyeball it and just see where that is. It's much shorter than the top. And so once you have that identified, you're going to give it a twist. Shove that right down this center piece. It's an opening. Make your loop. You can either measure it or eyeball it. I'm just going to eyeball it. And then give that a pinch and a twist. Shove that down in there. We've got our first loop. We're going to do the exact same thing over here. Just give it a pinch, no twist, because it's our last loop for this. I just fold them up to make sure they basically meet at the same spot. That's how you can make sure your loops are the same size. And then just grab your scissors. And for this particular bow, I want my tails to be about the same length, but I'm just going to eyeball it and cut that off. And ribbon number 1 is added. Then you take your pressing stick, again, not really sure what it's called, but that's what I call it. Push that down in there, and that really just pushes your ribbon close to the base of your bow dabra. And then we can move on to our second ribbon. This is the last little bit of the first roll I used. We're going to see if it's enough. It may not be. And again, I'm going to make it, probably on this particular bow, about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch shorter. Twist. Push that down in. Make your loop. You want it nearly the same size, possibly, 1/4 of an inch shorter than your previous loop. Twist. Boy, we're going to have just enough, friends. That's ironic. It's meant to be. Give it a pinch again, but no twist because it's the last loop. Fold your loops up to make sure they meet at the same place. That tells you you've got the same size. And we're done with our second layer. Take your pressing stick, press that down, and we're moving on to our third ribbon type. So I'm going to make this about the same length as the black and white check. So I'm just going to eyeball it, pretty side up for the tail, twist. going to make my loop about a 1/2 inch shorter than the previous, maybe 3/4 of an inch. Twist, press it down in, and this is our last loops. And no twist because we're not making any more loops. Press that down in, fold your loops up to make sure they meet at the same spot. That tells you if they're the same length. Cut off your ribbon so you're down to just your tail. Take your pressing stick and press that entire ribbon stack down. And now you're going to spin your bow dabber around, and you're going to carefully untuck your wire or your chenille stem, whatever you used, and slowly pull up on that ribbon stack. And when you get near the top, get your thumb in there to help press that together so your stack doesn't come undone. Then I just make an X with my chenille stem, pinch that thing as tight as I can get it on the front and the back, really pulling that as tight as I can, and just like before, spinning that around 4 or 5 times to really get a nice completed ribbon stack for our bow. Then you're just going to take your snips and trim off your excess chenille stem or wire, and your second bow stack is done. And so I'm just going to, just like before, pull all of our tails down. This one is really long because remember it was the tail end of that roll. So I'm just kind of pulling these tails so they're all pointing down. That's really all I'm worrying about at this point. What I want you to do at this point, friends, is go ahead and, if you would like to add any embellishments or florals into your wreath, go ahead and plug in your hot glue gun so that it can be heating up while we get things ready for that next step. All right, grab your wreath base and bring that back in. Take your bow stack that we just made, find that set of ties, make sure your tails and loops are going the right direction, and add that bow right down in there. Tighten those ties up 2 or 3 times really tightly. Trim off those excess bits, and then with your fingers or your needle nose pliers, curl that down under and out of the way. And now we will fluff our bow out. I think people get frustrated with bow making and bow fluffing, more importantly, because you see lots of people's bows on their wreaths and they seem perfect and poofy and even and all the things, but everybody struggles with this and gets frustrated with fluffing bows. So just give yourself some grace and some patience. I just realized, friends, I forgot to add the last black ribbon. I will certainly do that later. All right, so I'm fluffing out my loops, looking so stinking cute. Now, I'm going to trim my tails, and again, remember, go gently. You can always trim more off later if you want, but you can't put it back on. That is looking adorable. We probably won't even need to add in that other ribbon. I think it'll be just fine. Cute, cute, cute. Very springy, just what we need. All right, friends, I'm going to come back up here to the first bow that we added. Remember, we did the rough fluff, but it needs some more love. So I feel like this tail is okay. Our loops are looking really good. But I think this guy needs trimmed because it's blocking our sign. And these guys just need pulled off to the side. There we go. Much better. Much, much better. And remember, they're wired, so you can curl them. And to curl them, you just place them between your fingers, pull them up and over, and you'll get a nice curl. And you can drag them any direction you want, and they'll follow the flow of your fingers. That is too adorable. Okay. I'm going to grab some florals or greenery or embellishments. I haven't decided yet, and I'll meet you back here. All right, friends, at this point, any of the embellishments or greenery that we add, if you purchased a wreath kit, does not come with your kit. That's something you'll have to grab on your own and add it in as you wish. I've had this leftover black, white, and yellow pom-pom pick actually since last year, and I think we're going to play around with this and see what we think about it in this wreath. If you've never worked with a pom-pom pick, they're very versatile because you can really mold them how you want. So let me show you what I mean. This one, I mean, you can totally straighten it out. You can curl it up. They're very moldable. So that center wire is stiff yet flexible. So you can really tweak it, and you can even make a little corkscrew if you wanted. So it's very versatile. And I'm trying to decide where I want to place these, so give me just a moment while I poke around here. All right, friends, I've decided I'm going to use 2 of the 3 that I had. I've turned them into corkscrews, and you're going to have to leave your bottom couple of inches somewhat straight so that we can glue that guy and add it down into our spots. I'm going to add them here and here. And so what I'm going to do is on the back side, run a good bead of glue on that stick, as well as the back side of those pom-poms. Just that lower palm, to really make sure we get a good stick. Once that dries, then if you need to recurl your pom-pom curl, you can sure do so. Those are so stinking cute. Second pom-pom, make sure you're running that glue on the back side of your picks or your florals, because that's what's actually going to reach and touch. And again, you can adjust your curl in a half an hour or so once that glue is nice and dry. Just going to add a drop more down into that base. So now we're going to add some greenery picks. This I actually got from a company called Ellis's Home and Garden. You can order from them directly online. If you're interested in this particular greenery type, I'll show you the tag so you can just pause your video and write it down. But it's called a plastic mixed boxwood bush, and that SKU number is 13436YW. So I chose this particular greenery bush because I like a little bit of green in there just to really show that springy color, but this particular choice has got a lot of pale yellow blended in with it as well. I'm not sure if the camera is picking that up, but I feel like it'll be really complementary with our wreath. And so if you've not worked with a lot of florals or greenery, this is called a bush. And then each additional piece is called a stem. And so what I'm going to do, friends, is trim off. Looks like there's probably 7 or 8. I'm going to trim off each of these stems so that we can add them in. We'll see what we think. All right, and of course you can just throw that bit away. Now, most of the time, I would say 98% of the time when you're working with either florals or greenery, these pieces will slide. So you can see here, I'm not sure if that shows, but there's actually multiple layers to this particular stem, and you can push these guys up so that they're positioned where you want them to be. Okay, so I like to slide things around. I like them a little bit fuller at the top, so I've got lots of variegated textures and layers. That leaves us with probably a 2.5 inch stem, which is more than what we need. You only need about an inch, inch and a half. So then we're going to trim it off again because we don't need it to be that long. And then that will leave you with all of your greenery pushed up to where we like it, and then about 1.25 inches of stem. So go ahead and trim and prep all of your pieces here with your snips, and then we'll get those babies glued down in. All right, friends, I'm done trimming my bushes and I've trimmed off my ends, and we've got, looks like we've got 8 of these stems. I want to take a pause and show you a little trick. Now, if you're not someone who makes a boatload of wreaths, this may not be something of interest to you, but if you are someone who does and you use a lot of greenery or florals, when you are trimming off your excess bits of stem, and you're left with a stick that's 2 inches long or longer, just find a baggie or something to keep those, and let me show you why. Sometimes when you're working with florals, a piece will fall off, such as just happened with me, and instead of pitching that or trying to glue this little bitty nub down into a craft at a later point, you can pull out one of your spare pieces, add the teeniest drop of hot glue right at that base because they've all got holes in them, and then shove that leftover pick that you have right down in there. And then you've just given yourself a new pick. Just a little wreath maker's tip for you. Right, so before we glue these in, friends, you know me, I like to dry place things first. And so I'm just going to work my way around. I'm going to keep the longer pieces towards the back so I make sure that I'm always seeing these yellow bits. And I'm just going to dry run place these guys. And we may find that we may need to snip a little bit more off. I'm not sure. We'll see how this comes together. What I did, I actually took, I had just the right amount, one stem, and added it, or laid it, I should say, in the center of each ribbon tail stack on the lower level of our wreath. Hopefully this is in good camera view for you. And I really like the way that's looking. This little piece that we had left over earlier, I think I'm going to end up sticking right here near the center of the bow. We'll see. So now that I have those in place, I'm going to go ahead and glue them in. So you're just going to pull out your piece, determine if your stem length is long enough. You may have to trim some of them down. You're going to run your glue on the back side of that stem. Let me scoot this in, make sure you can see. Right along that stem. And give it 5 seconds of a good press right near where the V of those ribbon tails are. And then move along to your next one. I may be keeping this for myself. All right, friends, we've got that one last little pick here that we are going to, I think we're going to go ahead and add it near our bow. And as you can see, that drop of glue worked like a charm. We can trim some of this excess off. And I think we're going to add it right near the center of this bow. Let's see. Yep, that looks great. Peeking right out of that ribbon. Perfect. All right, friends, our wreath is totally done. You can just fluff out your tails a little bit, make sure everything is hanging where you would like. Get, if anything, a trim that you feel like is a tad too long. Give it a good solid half hour to dry, and I wouldn't put it outside for 24 hours, but it's totally finished. It is beautiful, and I hope you enjoyed creating with me today. And remember, if you'd like to recreate this wreath exactly as we did it, with the exception of the florals, go ahead and click the link below in the description. Thanks for spending some time with me today to craft and create, friends. Make sure you hit that like button if you enjoyed this tutorial. Happy crafting!